Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar in which we're going to look at strategies and solutions for unlocking value from unstructured data. My name is Mark McCord and I'm the editor of A-Team Group's Data Management Insight, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. But before we begin, I'd like to share some upcoming events with you all to get them in your diary and click on the registration buttons. On May the 13th, we have our next webinar, which will cover best practice approaches to data management for regulatory reporting. And then on June the 3rd, there's another webinar in which we'll be looking at streamlining trading and investment processes with data standards and identifiers. Then on May 22, with that, we have our AI in Capital Markets Summit London. And all of those details can be found at the bottom of your screen, where you can register and attend. So on to today's webinar. Unstructured data accounts for the vast majority of the data in financial institution systems. So getting this right is crucial. Explaining how this can be achieved and much else aside will be our guest speakers. We have Victor Tawari, Senior Vice President of Wealth Management and Private Banking and Chief Data Officer at Citigroup. Junaid Farouk is Senior Vice President, First Citizen Bank. Nicole M. Allen is Director of Text Analytics at LSEG. And Vahe Adonis is Chief Executive and Founder at Cognize. I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a moment, but first let me introduce you to Slido. That's our audience participation app that we'll be using today. On the right of your screen during the webinar, you'll see 3 panels during this webinar. One will be for audience polls, and we'll have 3 of those today, in which we ask you to vote on questions that we'll pose to you so we can gauge your interest in the topic. There'll also be audience questions which you can type whenever you like. We'll pose them to the speakers sometime during the webinar. And third of all, we're going to pioneer today a word cloud presentation about midway through the webinar, in which we'll ask you, the audience, to tell us what words come to mind when we mention the subject matter later on. But first of all, let's go to our speakers. And Nicole, can we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Nicole Allen. I lead text analytics at the London Stock Exchange Group. I have almost 20 years experience working in news and data product development. I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Junaid.
Hello, everybody. Junaid Farouk. I have over 25 years of experience working in data management. I have worked largely in financial services for large global investment banks, asset management firms, hedge funds. Spent some time in the retail and pharmacy sectors, and have pivoted into the AI space in the last few years, and how to leverage AI to better manage our data.
Thank you, Junaid. And hello, Vahe. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm the founder and CEO of Cognize. My background has been in AI since '96, basically. Of course, AI was something very different back then, but I almost continued this journey all the time till today, basically.
Excellent. Thank you, Vahe. And last but not least, Victor.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be with you all. My background, I'm currently with Citigroup in the wealth client data management. Several decades in trade execution, trade settlement background, but in the last, probably since 2008, 2010, within the client data management space, and specifically in the last 10, leveraging machine learning and predictive analytics to better understand and segmentize client behavior, client demographics.
Thank you all. Thank you for introducing yourselves. Now, before we go on to our first question, I'll ask a poll question, and you can all start, choose one from the list on your Slido panel. To what degree is your organization using unstructured data? We'll discuss your results after we've gone to our first question. And I'll put this to Nicole first. can we start off by establishing what unstructured data is and where this flood of it is coming from?
Sure. Yeah, so when we think about data, oftentimes, traditional data, we think about relational databases, SQL, field value pairs, things like that. It's very structured. Unstructured data really has developed a lot in the last 20 years with new sources of digital media. So we think about text, audio, video formats, and these are all they require more steps, right, to work with, because for a computer to understand it, it's just more complicated. But we'll get into this, of course, but unstructured data does make up about 90% of the data that's out there. So ignoring it, you're really leaving opportunity on the table, right? It's something that really just can't be avoided nowadays. And there's a lot of value in using it.
Excellent. Vahe, could you let us know, how do you see unstructured data?
I mean, I think that Nicole said everything important, right? I think we could stress it a little bit more by saying there's actually no such thing as unstructured data. It's very structured. It's just structured for humans and not for computers, right? And if you want to process it with a computer, then you need to, as she correctly said, do lots of steps to make it readable and understandable for a computer so that you can do your, apply your analytical framework on this, right? I think the one thing that I think is very important is that the amount of this data is really humongous, because all of us switched, or many of us switched the role from just a consumer to also a producer, to social media, to blog posts, to webinars, to other things. And that amount of data, if you think about it, in the last, I think this is a number that came from Eric Schmidt, in the last 2 years, he said 5 years ago, the amount of data that has been produced is more than any data that humanity has ever produced before, right? And the vast majority of it is unstructured data.
Right. Junaid, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I would say first I concur with Nicole and Vahe. I agree with everything they said. And to maybe get a little bit more specific, anything, Vahe, you said something very important. There's data that is structured for humans, which is we know it as tables and columns and rows, right? It's consumable to us. And the other data is consumable, meaning audio files, images, recordings, but they're not consumable in the same way. And I think you're right, which is that it's like, how do we consume that data? And then the other problem is consuming the vastness of it. But the definition of unstructured data, I concur, is to me is anything that doesn't sit in a column or a table in columns and rows. And then Vahe touched on something very important. Is like, how do you go from unstructured to structured, and the concept of semi-structured, which we'll get there. But yeah, I would say anything that doesn't sit in a table format or in some sort of database format.
Right. And Victor, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, most everyone has stated this, but just to emphasize, right? The volume is so large because we do so many activities. We're able to record this at this point in time. If I snap my fingers, if I say hello to you, but how much of it is meaningful, right? So this is all a lot of unstructured data that, as Vahe mentioned and Nicole, we need to put a semi-structure on to be consumable. So then we can model this and make sense of it, heads or tails. That's why it's so voluminous. But the key fact here is, or the key here is, how do we efficiently take in pertinent unstructured data, because you're going to get a whole voluminous set. But which of this information is of value and has most impact to your ultimate why, ultimate predictive question that you're trying to resolve, or business problem? That's the challenge. I mean, as in data science, it's the heavy lift and shift to ingest. But the big part here, I think we're here on data management, is how do we efficiently ingest? How much do we want to pay for this effort, whether it's CapEx costs or it's human costs and resources, and then ultimately how much of it is meaningful that could actually help sway and make a meaningful decision.
Yeah, thanks. Let's look at the results of the Slido poll. I don't know if they're up. It's quite a very even split. use it in a few specific parts of the enterprise. We are examining where we can use it. So there's engagement with it, although and we use it widely. It's a fairly even split. Is that how you would expect to see things, Victor?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll go into this deeply in the use cases as well. I mean, one of the use cases that previous firms, this is going down 10 years again, was call center, right? And call center conversations with the client. Now, on that conversation, obviously, you have a broker or a registered rep speaking with the client. They may talk about baseball, they may talk about sports, but then when they talk about certain pertinent information, those are the tidbits that either may need to be reviewed from a compliance perspective, or perhaps we're selling them fixed income products and they're talking about equities, and there's an opportunity for cross-sell and upsell. So yes, there's some really key aspects that unstructured data can really enhance your giving you insights that you may not have seen before, just with structured information.
Okay. And Nicole, is there anything surprising in those results?
No, I mean, I've seen polls similar to this, and it tends to be 50-50. I think that's kind of the current trajectory. Some of it is also related to whether you have the resources and the know-how to work with it, which I think explains also some of the results here. And I do think as time progresses, we're going to see more and more people using it, especially with developments in technology that are making it easier to work with unstructured data.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I mean, unstructured data, it's a huge volume of data, but why is it so important to financial institutions today, Junaid?
We touched on it earlier, just the sheer volume of it. Nicole mentioned 90%. I would say the most common quote that you hear in terms of the amount of it is 80 to 90% of an organization's data is by definition unstructured. There's got to be value in there. I think Victor also touched on the point, which is what in that volume is noise and what is value, and that's where the nuance. There's some of the nuances. I think the reason that so the first reason is that just the sheer volume. There's got to be value in there, and I'll go into a little bit of the value statement, like why financial institutions care. And we'll elaborate in our use cases. You have chat logs, you have emails from customer where you can gauge consumer sentiment. And there's value in that sentiment to understand or get really true, deeper insights into customer. So I think you're just going to find value there, and the trick is going to be filtering out the noise.
We lost you momentarily there, Junaid, but I think we got the gist of your important contribution. Vahe, what would you say is why unstructured data is so important to financial institutions?
I mean, there's a very old saying. I think we can repeat this. It's probably true for many cases, which says more data beats better models. So if you just know more about something in terms of data, it's easier to model that in your analytical framework, and to make sure that you understand the risk, understand the opportunities, understand everything just much better. Of course, you need to take it with a grain of salt. It's not always true, but it is often true, and it makes sense. And also, I think that we lived now in the last 20 years through a change. And the change was very much having an advantage through having access to certain information, change to having an advantage to being able to deal with every information. Right? So because information is much more available now than it was 20 years ago. So the question now for a company is, can I apply this data to my analytical framework in a fast, easy, correct way, and as the colleagues have said, filter out the noise from the actual data or not, right? That's the actual alpha that you can generate with this data.
Okay, yeah. Victor, any further thoughts on that?
Last bit, just to expand on Vahe's point, and forgive me, don't quote me here, but I think it's from a Gartner statistic I saw, roughly just in regards to unstructured data, the last 5 or 7 years, we've created more data in the last 5 or 7 years than mankind has ever created years prior since the recording. So again, yes, it's voluminous, but to the points I harp back on is the main key is harnessing it, ingesting it, as Nicole alluded to. There's a special skill set there. There's a special cost. Do you want to be in the business of ingesting unstructured data? It's a buy or build decision. Then more so is how do we harness those key elements of, as Vi said, the more the data, the better the models. But then you need to know which one are impactful data attributes or features that can actually be impactful for that decision making. So it's exciting, it's interesting, but definitely with some challenges.
Yeah. Nicole, what's LSEG's view on the importance of unstructured data?
Well, I mean, certainly a lot of our customers are using it, right? So that means that we need to be in the business of offering, solutions that serve the needs of our customers. So, I specifically work on news products, and a good example would be obviously news is considered unstructured data. And we offer solutions that create structure from news, right? So we have, for instance, a machine readable news product. Now, why would that be of interest to people? There are things that break in the news every day that if you're not monitoring, you could leave money on the table, right? Because they move the financial markets. So, we help create value by having solutions that have, for instance, very good metadata, which allows data scientists to take those products and integrate them with larger models that they might have. And that allows their companies to obviously protect themselves against risk, and also to generate, more alpha, more opportunity.
Thank you. If we go on now to our third question, which is, what are the benefits of using unstructured data? We've already touched on that, but what are the principles behind the harnessing of unstructured data? How can it help organizations? Let's start with Victor.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Nicole led straight into this. Everyone is interested because of the competitive advantage, right? You don't want to be left behind, especially in finance. It can offer very valuable insight in regards to sentiment, customer sentiment, personalized customer experience, efficiencies, so forth and so on. But again, it's when you approach this, and then that's why that chart, that the poll that you had, seems like some are scattering, some maybe have some. It's a cautious approach. At least maybe I might be in the minority. Is probably the best. The rule of thumb is that understanding what your core business is, when understanding what your core subject matter expert customer information is, can only be enhanced by unstructured data, but it shouldn't be the bedrock. It's an enhancement of information that actually, like Nicole mentioned, tweaks the alpha, adds the competitive advantage, but it's not the core bedrock. So if you're approaching unstructured data, I would suggest understand your business, understand the core models, core information that you have, the products that you sell, and then of course see how you want to approach this even more in regards to fine tuning an engine that you have in place with unstructured data. That will give you other insights that you may not have seen with structured information, but it's not going to be the bedrock. I don't know if any of my colleagues have disagree with that, but that's maybe the approach that I.
Yeah. Junaid, what do you see as the kind of the benefits in principle?
Yeah, in terms of benefits and value, maybe I'll use like a specific example. You have a client or a customer. You can do some client analytics based on their transactions or their history. You could see that data in a database and table, how long they've been a client and what kind of transactions they've done with you. And what Victor touched on, which I think was very important, is that unstructured data can add context to that. So if you can now link that customer's chat logs, emails, customer service calls, it will augment what you already know about that client. What you don't know through his transactions and his trades is that maybe he's just a savings account client, or he's just a credit card client. But maybe through his chat logs and maybe through his phone calls, he's looking for wealth management services. And you can augment your view of the client through those unstructured sources. Is we see him inquiring or asking about a personal banker, about portfolio management. And I think Victor touched on, sort of emphasized Victor's point with an example. You take that unstructured data and you augment it with your structured view of that to add those deeper insights. And I think that's where the benefit is, and that's where the value is.
Nicole, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, I think it expands the number of use cases that you can work with. So for instance, if you're an investment banker and you want to do research into what your customers are thinking about something, you could mine different chat boards, to see what people are talking about, or what your customers are saying about you. There's just so many things you can do. You can work with legal documents on, compliance use cases, et cetera. So I think it just greatly expands the type of work that you can do. And that in and of itself creates a lot more opportunities that financial institutions can be harnessing and thinking about.
Right. Yeah, Vahe, opportunities. Is that how you see unstructured data?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we can summarize it with this. I think it was in the 60s, Weiner wrote a paper about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in science, where he showed that, a simple formula like E equals mc squared explains such a complex phenomenon. And then many years later, Google came out with a paper referencing it and said that the unreasonable effectiveness of data in social sciences. So the idea there is that suddenly, if you don't go with mathematics, but more data, you can understand your customer much better, and you can serve her or him much, much better with that information, right? So it's a really bespoke service to an individual rather than looking at, a standard product to everybody else. And that has a huge advantage in itself.
Right. We'll look at some of the specific use cases in a moment, but first let's have another poll of viewers. And if you go to your Slido screen again, you'll see the question is, for what use cases are you applying unstructured data? Again, we'll give you a few minutes to vote, and in the meantime, we'll discuss exactly that. What are some of the specific use cases that unstructured data is enabling to be created? If we start with you, Junaid, what would you say are some of the more useful use cases?
Yeah, I touched on one earlier about augmenting a customer view, but let me throw a couple more out there. Some very pragmatic ones. There's a lot of unstructured data that exists as it relates to, if you look at your SharePoint site. Let's say you have a large financial transformation happening at your institution. You will have people in the business, you'll have people in technology, and you'll have people in data, all sort of working together to put this move this transformation forward. In that effort, you will have meeting agendas, meeting minutes. You will have Zoom recordings. You will have video diagrams. Somebody may take a picture of a whiteboard. All of that is unstructured data. If you could put all of that on a SharePoint site and you can point AI at it, what you could do is have AI connect the dots. Oh, I see the business talking about this. You're not going to make every meeting. You're not going to participate in everything, and you're not going to do that. But you can leverage that unstructured data to connect the dots and cross-reference information. And so, like a very pragmatic, something that I think you could do today in an institution that is low risk because your data never leaves the firm. And the tools that exist for this are now becoming very good. search, summarize information in the way of Word documents, images, recordings, like you move a recording to text, and you can really cross-reference. I see the tech guys, if you're a data, I see the tech guys talking about X architecture. I don't know that aligns with us. And it's very effective in that way. And some other sort of very pragmatic use cases. You will see patterns in terms of chat logs and calls when it comes to anti-money laundering or trade surveillance. If you have insider trading, there is patterns of behavior that AI is very good at recognizing, and it'll recognize it in those sort of unstructured formats. And so you can sort of get ahead of, you can spot those patterns is maybe the best way to say it. It's like, I see a pattern of behavior in, cross-referencing email, chat logs, phone logs, that might lead to something like insider trading, another very pragmatic case.
Yeah. Excuse me. Vahe, any thoughts on specific use cases?
I mean, everything that, of course, Renee said is very, very applicable, interesting, and high value. We can also look at the world of documents in itself, right? So you have, if you are in structured finance, you are getting trustee reports, you're getting indentures, you need to process them. If you are giving out loans, then you need to look at financials, you need to process those. KYC documents, which are not only passports, but also contracts and other things, loan agreements, if you're in subscription finance, if you are doing anything in syndicated loans, then you're getting lots of agent bank notices. So these are like really oftentimes PDF documents scanned, sometimes in a very pure quality, and you need to extract some important information out of this to process it much faster.
Gotcha. And Victor, at Citigroup, what use cases are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, our colleagues touched on most sentiment analysis, personalized customer experience, fraud detection, negative news monitoring as well. That could be another element in regards to credit risk aspect. But I have one that's completely outside of finance, but also very interesting, especially in the next decade, especially as we see this AI boom, quote unquote, with NVIDIA and so forth. The virtual twins, I'm not sure if everybody is aware, I think they are, right? So the virtual twins, what they're going for is actually these high rises that we have here in Manhattan or other places, or even smaller places. They're trying to add operational efficiency, right? So how can unstructured data help there? To get to that space where you actually have, let alone an eight unit apartment building now to a 20, 30 floor high rise, they're putting in, we all, most of us, a lot of us have the Ring camera, things of that nature, Internet of Things. So it's capturing a lot of events. Again, goes back to the point of we have voluminous data, but how much of it is actually meaningful? So operational efficiency and specific identification of problems, as Junaid alluded to, and process optimization. So we may have closed circuit cameras around those buildings. We have other things that understand the throughput of electricity and wiring that's going through. So if you have, and it can send out signals in regards to computer vision on what is a suspect grouping of in the computer vision, maybe in an area that people shouldn't be in, that can identify. That can then alert. So let me take a step back. What do I mean by virtual twin? It means that to take the entire building. Now look in this scale, right? To get that, it's a whole question of CapEx in regards to infrastructure and building this out. But let's say we can take the Empire State Building and make a virtual twin out of that Empire State Building. Imagine all the conduits there, the electricity, the light bulbs, the floors, the mopping liquids, and everything, soup to nuts in regards to that. And also the cameras. That information, the Internet of Things, the things that can monitor some of that information then can be processed as unstructured data. And then that's the only way we'll get to a virtual twin, where you can have, instead of having an army of 200 to 300 people that are maintaining, and maybe even 1,000. I mean, in my apartment building in Midtown Manhattan, we have about 30 people for a 300 unit, right? You're paying a salary. Our salary comes to about $3-4 million a year just for those people to service that building. Imagine what it would be on a, if you can virtually create a virtual twin, have this information in regards to you can actually understand signals and signs of when you're going to have a problem before you have one, when a light bulb is going to be 80% end of life, where it can be replaced as opposed to waiting for a light bulb and maybe you have an electrical problem or it bursts, whatever the case may be. That unstructured data is going to be vital, especially with the systems and techniques to process that information to make a virtual twin, and then imagine the operational efficiencies that you have. So instead of spending 10, 20, $30 million a year to maintain, you can now maybe pay 1/3 the cost. So that, and I know I said that fast, and apologies if I didn't say that very eloquently, but what I'm trying to say here is that unstructured data, the Internet of Things, will add operational efficiency and more so problem identification prior to, anomaly detection, prevent and understand. So you don't have to have humans going through monitoring of, you will still need security guards, but you can have this done in an automated fashion, but that won't happen without unstructured data and the processing of unstructured data.
Before we look at the poll results, Nicole, is there anything that you can foresee unstructured data enabling in terms of use cases?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we were just talking about anomaly detection. I always like to give the example of Wirecard. That was a German payment processing company that was essentially cooking their books, and they had false accounting. But at the time, many credit models had given it a perfect score, right? Because it was based purely on their financials. And that's an example where if you were monitoring unstructured data, in this case, the Financial Times put out a series of investigations. And if you had that integrated into a model, you'd be able to react very quickly to it. So that, again, that's just an example where being a little more sophisticated in terms of what you're doing as a financial institution and looking at more sources of data, you can be more prepared. Another example would be like satellite imaging. I don't think we mentioned that, but that's also something that people are using for like supply chain, being able to understand economic and environmental conditions. Audio transcripts, I don't think we mentioned conference calls. Increasingly, people are listening to the tone of the CEO when they're talking about earnings results. And that goes into more analytics as well. We mentioned that, but then creating those derived insights from what's actually taking place with the unstructured data, right? Whether it's positive or negative, the tone of the person's voice, et cetera. So I think we've talked about quite a number of use cases. It's obviously very vast in terms of what you can do with it.
Yeah, that's great. It is. And if we look at the poll results, we can see what our viewers are using it for right now. Customer sentiment analysis, I see that, and regulatory processing. Yeah, Nicole, staying with you, how does that key with your observations?
Sure. I mean, sentiment analysis has been around for a long time. I worked on one of the first versions of New Sentiment. I think it was 15 years ago. But obviously, I mean, it's very, very useful to know what's happening, with different, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral. And there's other types of text analytics, even beyond sentiment analysis, that you can talk about. So I think again, it's very interesting to see that is the one that is being used the most. And then of course, all the other ones as well are things that I think touched upon briefly.
Yeah. We offered the viewers a limited selection, but Junaid, are you surprised by any of the lower results, risk management, for instance?
No, I wouldn't say that I'm surprised by the results. To Nicole's point, customer sentiment analysis is the driving factor, because I think that's what we are most interested in. Is like all of our businesses are customer centric. That customer sentiment analysis has been around the longest, so people are more comfortable with that topic. But the one that I think catches my eye is trade and investment strategies. I'll share one very interesting use case that I was a part of a couple of years ago. There was a couple of day traders. They were like, we want to look at social media feeds on companies, Starbucks, you name the company. They found that there was a correlation between social media feeds and our social media sentiment and short-term stock price. So they were looking at very basic things like they were looking at smiley faces, angry faces, keywords. Again, not structured by any means, just looking at emoticons and then developing a sentiment on a company's stock price. And they found this correlation that when there was negative news about a company, even if their financials were very good, there was a short-term impact, meaning 2-day, 3-day, 5-day impact on everything. So there is this sort of cross-section of like looking at sentiment analysis in trading strategies. Thought it was one of the most interesting cases that I'd ever come across.
Great stuff. We thank you for that, everyone. What we're going to do now is go to our word cloud, which is something we're using for the first time. So we hope this is going to be a successful experiment. We're asking you to let us know in one word, if possible, or no more than a couple, what challenges you're facing in extracting unstructured data and using it. We'll give you a few minutes to submit your words, and so before we show the complete cloud after the next question. But we'll go to we'll go to Nicole first to just touch on some of the challenges faced by in extracting this data.
Sure. So I think first off, if you're a data scientist and you're working with unstructured data, typically you're going to be using natural language processing to basically understand the information. So there's a series of steps that you have to go through. You have to collect the data. You got to clean it, pre-process it, and you got to analyze it, visualize it. So it can be very time consuming. That's obviously a key challenge. So one of the things that we as a market data provider try to do is obviously offer solutions that make that a little bit easier, right? I mentioned metadata with news as an example, or analytics products that make it easier for people to generate insight from unstructured data. But there's also things called data science ready feeds, where, for instance, you make it easier for a data scientist to work with it because you've already taken out boilerplates or links, and you've eliminated some of those steps that I mentioned as it relates to cleaning and pre-processing. So in general, other challenges, scalability, searching, sorting through data, working, data quality, establishing standards, because again, we're talking about lots of different types of data. And then of course there's the cost aspect, because you need qualified professionals that know how to work with unstructured data. And you need to know how to work with it. And then the cost of storage and of course, large language models now working with that also takes time and effort and know-how.
Right. Yeah. If we can look at the cloud, if there's many words in our word cloud yet, we can talk about that. Junaid, cost and context, are those words that come to mind when you think about challenges to extracting unstructured data?
I will say I'm a little bit surprised by the result. What comes to mind for me, I'm going to see if I could find it here. Oh, there it is, tools. Is that what is the quote unquote tools that we use to rationalize unstructured data, right? I think our ability to produce data, I said, is like we've been now have the ability to produce data for a very long time. But what is that suite of tools that allows us to go look at images, text files, video recordings, images? That tool set hasn't existed 10 years ago or 5 years ago. AI now is changing that paradigm, is that now that we're developing the right tool set to go look at a spectrum of sources and file types. So to me, I would have said the biggest challenge would be technology and tools. What is the technology and tools that we use to seize it? Everything, I think cost is, there's a cost associated with it. But for me, I would say technology and tools is what I was expecting to be the number one answer.
Right. Victor, cost and context. I guess context means linguistic context for, I suppose, the use of AI and natural language processing to identify the meaning of words and sentences.
Yeah. To me, I'm looking at this slightly different than Junaid, and I think aligned in the same way with Junaid. We had this conversation, us group, yesterday. And to me, cost, Ken, we don't have granularity on what do we mean by cost. Are we talking about cost for storage? Are we talking about cost for subject matter expertise, as Nicole was stating, to ingest this information, the 80% work of making this digestible and the tool sets to make it of value to be fed to modeling. I don't know if cost is the tool sets or the subject matter experts, but that's how I see it. Is that cost is not so much a storage cost, but yes, in regards to, because this set of skill set to actually consume, format, wrangle, ingest, and make digestible for models is a very unique skill set, and it's a very highly touted skill set. So then you have that conversation, I think we discussed a little earlier, of the buy and build decision. Are you in the business of building out a technology or data science shop to ingest, or do you want to go out and purchase, these types of, from an analytics service provider or so forth and so on, and then have them, again, if your compliance and your regulatory environment permit, then make this digestible so you can do what your business is core on, understanding the information, understanding the client and or products, and leveraging that. So that's where I see cost. The context, again, alluded to that, is related as well. Doesn't surprise me, because now when we have, how do we get it, and how do we make sense of it? So that's the context part of it. It's like, okay, now how do I get it first? And once I have it, which is a huge Herculean task, now how do I figure out through this volume of data how much of this is meaningful and how much of it is noise? So yeah, I think to me, I'm looking at this, them all related and kind of part of the conversation we had yesterday that we were aligned to.
Yeah, and Vahe, I see complexity. I guess complexity of the data sets is emerging as well.
Well,
any thoughts?
I have to say, I actually agree with what's written there. I think I would make context maybe even bigger so than cost. And Mark, I wouldn't think that any of these current large language models have a problem in understanding the context of what you gave it to the system, right? But just take this example, right? You want it to code for you, okay? So you give it a file and say like optimize it, but it doesn't see all the other parts of the code, so it missing the context of how you are doing things and so on, and you're just optimizing one file, right? So I think context is this, and Anthropic just came out with a protocol which is called MCP, where they're trying to exactly address that part of it, where you can give more to the AI model in an easier way so that it understands the context of it better. And I think that cost matters if you take into account that the problems that Nicole mentioned and the other fellow colleagues mentioned are actually also solvable with AI. Because frankly, and we have to be honest here, that a data scientist role can be very much automated with AI itself right now, at least for anything that is mid or lower than that, right? And we see this already happening. It's not just a theory. We see it already happening. Now, the problem there is, though, that if you are going to replace that and you're paying, I don't know, $15, $20, $25, $30 an hour, and now you're paying to AI $45 an hour, then that doesn't make sense, right? If you look at what computer use is doing for Anthropic, or some other of these large AI models are doing, I mean, they are pretty close to what I think people are right that by the end of the year, vibe coding or coding without actually writing code is going to be the standard mode. And if you take that into this equation, then suddenly cost matters really a lot, because if you want to scale this up to I want to have 5,000 of those, but they cost me $45 an hour, then it gets expensive.
And so to me, that was what I see cost as, exactly what you describe, is not so much the cost, it's the service cost now of getting that expertise, whether you're buying a tool and or accessing. And now there are those vendors and service providers that are monetizing that, right? Some, sort of like giving this as a lead in, join our platform, do this, and then ultimately they'll have the compute cycle model and so forth and so on, and then it becomes prohibitive. So that's where I think I saw that. Sorry to jump in, Brad.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Victor. I'm glad Vahe mentioned AI there, which seems to be, I think in the room, because we'll go to some audience questions, and the first one does touch on that. So, what strategies and tools have you used to do data discovery of unstructured data and classify them to help facilitate AI and machine language models, in addition to helping the data compliance policies and standards? Nicole, would you like to?
Well, yeah. So one thing that I would mention, obviously, the advent of large language models is changing things. I mean, we touched on it briefly. Data scientists use something called, ETL, extract, transform, and load. And that's how you take unstructured data and turn it into structured data. So one comment I would just make on that is that like the recent releases of OpenAI now allow for structured output as part of the prompt. So that's already been quite a step forward, right? If you're a data scientist, because already it's kind of a lot less work, right? So that's one thing that I think is notable to mention.
And Junaid, any thoughts on that? Strategies and tools that you've used in data discovery of unstructured data to classify them to help AI?
Yeah, I would say there was a step I mentioned earlier. We talked about unstructured data and we talked about structured, and then in between is the semi-structured state, right? Which is that you want to make your unstructured data queryable. You want to make it searchable. You want to make it interoperable. And so if you can get your data, if you can transform a transcript to text, then you can add metadata around it. And when you can do that transfer of unstructured to semi-structured, then when it becomes queryable, when it's becomes searchable, you do things like with AI, like classify data. Like one of the most dependable things you could do with AI is use it to search, you could put the parameters in and you could classify data. Once it's classified correctly and you have the appropriate metadata, you can then take that data and then, like I said earlier, connect it to structured data. So I think that's the process of making it like a good strategy of making it leverageable, is moving it from moving it from unstructured to semi-structured, and then using tools to summarize the semi-structured state, classify the semi-structured state, and then connecting it, using it to AI to leverage to identify the relationships between the semi-structured and structured states.
Right. Yeah, excellent. Victor, you talked about eliminating the noise earlier. We've got an audience question. How are you currently maintaining unstructured data? Because the disparity of useful versus irrelevant data is growing, potentially due to increasing regulation and making it harder to sift through. What are the current methodologies of processing the data?
So I can speak only to the space that I am somewhat clear on, or at least have familiarity with, because there are various, as our colleagues went through. I'll go back to that call center representative in regards to opportunities to twofold, is understand customer sentiment, but also from a compliance and regulatory perspective. So for instance, let's say, Mark, we have a relationship with you here at Citigroup, and we have you have an account and so forth, and you have multiple products involved, maybe only, let's say, equity based and maybe non-derivatives or whatever the case may be. You're on the phone and you're chatting with your representative in regards to your portfolio, but then maybe asking questions about other products that we may be, credit cards or some other case that may just come out of a natural conversation, and your sentiment voice and so forth, and your tone is captured. That stream information is captured by voice, on the call center. It's recorded and it's unstructured. Needs to put some semi-structure in regards to that, as Junaid and Nicole and others have mentioned. So there's a categorization of that conversation, key words, bag of words, very basic stuff with NLP, but I'm sure our colleagues can go much deeper on that. But they're labeled. There's some labels in regards to that structure that's put in place. And then those labels are basically trial and error fed through in regards to seeing, where there's opportunity. You have again, basing on structured data, basing on models of, we know our customer, we know 20 years of history, 50 years of history in regards to not this particular customer, but in general. You can categorize this customer as a medium net worth client, high net worth client, high risk, low risk, medium risk, their aperture, and so forth and so on. That model can be fed through a structured model, with this semi-structured label, and that helps us and understand sentiment where there's an opportunity for cross-sell and upsell. But then in that conversation as well, from a regulatory perspective, let's say some things where keywords were mentioned or key discussions that pose some risk. So you can be proactive or preemptive in regards to discussing, let's say the client is asking of, how do I set up an account in Iran or some other Saudi Arabia or other high risk aspect, or maybe I want to do business with Aramco, which is a high risk enterprise. Those then can be trickled up based on a threshold of risk, from a preemptive client risk perspective. Again, so those, in short, taking that stream of information, putting semi-structure on there, putting some labels on there, and then through trial and error and understanding, as you go through the model, you see which one of these elements are actually impactful to making the why factor on the model. And then that's where you can deeper dive and you can collect more key information in that space, if that was clear.
Yeah, that's great. We've not got much time left, and then quite a few questions to go. So, Vahe, if we go to you, how can we ensure the quality of the data that we are extracting?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, I think, because when we talk about AI these days, at least when I talk about AI, and I think it's true for the colleagues too, we are talking mostly about generative AI right now, which is the new kid in the town, which ultimately is, if you pair it with some technology like agentic technologies, almost behaving like humans. Now, Sam Altman would say it's a PhD. I wouldn't say it's a PhD, but it's getting much better, right? And the question is, how do you get consistency there? Now, that's actually a very deep and difficult problem, because these processes, these language models actually go through a stochastic process. So they have something which you can call hallucination, you can call whatever you call it. I say it's actually a feature of it, and you cannot turn it off, because it would be like totally deterministic. Then you wouldn't have the advantage of a language model. It wouldn't be actually thinking anymore, right? So you want it to be a stochastic process, but then again, you're very right. You want also the deterministic output of it, like you want the right output out of this, right? So you need to translate something stochastic into something deterministic, and that's hard to do. We do it with what we call validators that can be rules that you can formulate, like total assets has to be the sum of current assets and non-current assets, as an example, right? These are then translated into a symbolic representation, which is a mathematical formula. And then during the extraction is checked against a symbolic, not a language model is checking that, but a mathematical interpreter is checking that. So we are combining the stochastic and the symbolic with each other. But it is not an easy thing to do. I agree with this. And there are many places where it's hard to do it. But you need to find ways around this, and validators is one way of doing that.
Okay, thank you. Junaid, where are current data management strategies failing to harness unstructured data?
I think identifying the proper use cases. I think the quality problem is a good one that I'll tie to this one. which is you have so much of the data, you have so much data, unstructured data. How do you know that it's right? And so it doesn't become leverageable, right? It's a challenge. It's like, how do you know if an image is right or wrong, that or some text exchange is right or wrong? So I think not appropriately measuring um, the quality or having a good approach to quality, which I think should be just I think just taking a very basic approach to build on the quality thing, and I'll tie it back to this answer is, you have unstructured data and you want to know if the context of it is right for your use case. So you might have some unstructured data in terms of a voice file or a text file. It may have nothing to do with a marketing team or a marketing use case. But it may be a file or input to a trade surveillance use case. So having the appropriate use cases and then having the appropriate unstructured data tied to a use case. So identifying the right use cases, identifying the right unstructured data in that 80-90%, making it searchable, making it queryable, and attaching it to the right use case. I think that's one of the hardest things to do.
Right. Okay. Well, we've almost run out of time, so I would like to get your one golden nugget of advice that you would offer to practitioners embarking on a new strategy of unstructured data extraction. Maybe we'll start with you, Victor.
Okay. So I would just simply go back to this mantra that I have again: unstructured data. If you're relatively unsure of it, the Warren Buffett rule, right? With finance trading, if you don't know what you're doing, don't do anything. So so basically stick to your core business, core understanding of what you do well. Establish modeling and your subject matter expertise there, because that's your bread and butter. That's what pays the bills, and that's what actually is going to excel in regards to your competitive advantage. But explore unstructured data in this aspect as an enhancement of your existing core set, a competitive advantage. But when you do that, always have a mindset of understanding: is this going to be a buy or build situation for me? Do I want to invest capital, resources, and strategy towards this in gestation? As Nicole mentioned, it's voluminous and subject matter expertise. It's a very narrow skill set, let alone having to retain this skill set. Or do you want to buy this type of service as a SAP, as a service provider, and then understand to what level your competitive advantage, weigh that out, but stick to what you know. And then you definitely do not close your eyes to this, but approach it cautiously, but with some proof of concept.
Gotcha. Vahe, your one piece of advice.
My one piece of advice would be that we should stop thinking in language models and start thinking in systems, because you need to get them into, if you want to do something useful with them, you need to have an engineering practice, a governance practice, and so on to really get this into production in a meaningful way. And I think there's an overemphasis on the LLM piece of it, because it is very fascinating. I have to admit, my life is around that, so of course I'll stick with that. But everybody else should think really in systems there, and there's a lot to do.
Nicole, your final thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think again, there's a large spectrum of practice in terms of the very sophisticated players working with unstructured data that have been for some time, and then the more nascent companies that are kind of new to it and learning about it. So I would say you need to have a plan. You need to think about what are you able to do based on the human capital that you have. And going back to the buy or build, think about other options, other products that might be available to help you with what you're trying to do if you're not able to do it in-house, because it is a very heavy lift, requiring very specialized skill sets. It is becoming easier, as I mentioned, with developments in technology. But I would just say, think about it, and have a plan And what it, again, go back to what it is you're trying to solve, right? Kind of your first principles, because to what Vahe was saying a moment ago, a lot of people get very excited about LLMs now, especially, and to the point where they kind of forget about first principles and what it is that they're actually trying to solve for. So that's what I would say to that question.
Thank you. And Junaid?
I'll say, I think very simply, be thoughtful about your use cases, turn unstructured data into a metadata exercise, metadata and tagging exercise, leverage AI for classifications, and human in the loop for high-risk situations.
Great advice. Thank you all. That concludes the webinar today. I'd like to thank Nicole, Junaid, Vahe, and Victor for their contribution. And just to remind you one more time that we have coming up our AI and Capital Markets Summit London, which will be held on May the 22nd at the Leonardo Royal City in London. So thank you for watching and see you at our next webinar. Goodbye.